All my pens disappeared? I brought a handful. Are they all gone?
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Brittany Kabinski, and I just want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 o'clock, so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today, on June 24th, we will have our presentation on the H+T Affordability Index and applications in planning. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box, and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. As you can see, we have a few upcoming webcasts in the month of July, August, and September. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcast.htm and register for your webcast of choice. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, June 24th, and then select today's webcast, the H+T Affordability Index and Applications in Planning. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are recording today's webcast, and it will be available along with a 6-slide per page PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. At this time, I would like to introduce our speakers for today, Maria Choca Urban, Peter Haas, and Stephanie Morse. As CNT's Director of Transportation and Community Development, Maria Choca Urban handles land use, transportation, housing, and economic development issues. She works with state and local government officials as well as civic groups and other constituents to advance Center for Neighborhood Technology initiatives in these areas. In this capacity, she advances the application of CNT tools in the development of plans for more sustainable development in urban areas. Among the tools that CNT has developed are the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index, a planning tool that documents the combined costs of housing and transportation by neighborhood within urban regions, the Cargo and Transit-Oriented Development Optimizer tool, and the National TOD database, a one-stop shop that aggregates Census, transportation planning package, local employment dynamics, and H+T data to the half-mile area around every fixed guideway transit station in the U.S., with the aim of accelerating the adoption of TOD in a greater number of places. Since joining CNT in 1994, Dr. Peter Haas has revolutionized the geographic analysis of social, environmental, and economic data to produce groundbreaking tools for measuring sustainability in urban areas. Dr. Haas has been integral in the development of CNT's location efficiency metrics and developed its Housing and Transportation Affordability Index, co-produced with the Brookings Institution. He acted as the analytical director for the 22-member CNT research team, producing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory and 33 mitigation strategies for the Chicago Climate Action Plan. His work in GIS, web development, and data analysis have come together into the Geographical Research and Information Department at CNT, where Dr. Haas and his colleagues work to provide technical, geographical, and analytical input to all of CNT's programs. Prior to CNT, Dr. Haas was a systems manager at Sieben Energy Associates, adjunct faculty at the William Rainey Harper College, and postdoctoral researcher at Cornell's University Laboratory for Nuclear Studies and the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory. Dr. Haas has a PhD in particle physics from The Ohio State University. Stephanie Morse, research coordinator, is a key analyst for community projects utilizing CNT's Housing and Transportation Affordability Index, a groundbreaking new tool measuring the effect of urban form and location efficiency on household affordability. Stephanie focuses on coordinating and assisting with data analysis, as well as the development and expansion of the H+T Index. Prior to joining CNT, Stephanie relocated to Chicago to pursue her interest in sustainable development after receiving her master's degree in natural resources from the University of Vermont. While a graduate student, she also earned a certificate in ecological economics from the Gund Institute of Ecological Economics, housed at the University of Vermont.
Good afternoon to all of you. It's our pleasure here at CNT to take part in this APA-sponsored webcast on the H+T Affordability Index. I'd like to thank Jennifer Cowley and her assistants Cody Price and Brittany Kabinski for organizing the webcast. And I'd also like to thank Stephanie Scholl and Matt Bork here at CNT for making this possible. I'm Maria Choca Urban, the Director of Transportation and Community Development, and as Jennifer just said, we have Peter Haas and Stephanie Morse joining me today to make this presentation. Today's presentation is going to cover what the index is, why we created it, and what are the key insights that it gives us. Peter's going to talk about current efforts to update the H+T Index in the next few months. Then we're going to cover different ways that the index has been used, and Stephanie will be giving us an introductory demonstration of the H+T website. We've left time at the end of our presentation for questions. If you have questions during the presentation, we encourage you to submit them using the chat tab on the side of your screen. We'll organize the questions, eliminate duplicates, and with any luck, we'll get to all of them before we're through today. No presentation would be complete without a commercial advertisement, so this is my plug for the Center for Neighborhood Technology. We're a 33-year-old not-for-profit based in Chicago that operates nationally. We've been dedicated to urban sustainability since before the term came into vogue. CNT thinks of itself as a think and do tank that combines research and tool development with demonstration projects to prove and test our hypotheses. The results of all of these efforts feed into our advocacy and policy development work. We have 4 program areas covering energy, climate, transportation, and water, and our research and GIS division underpins all 4 of those program areas. We have an unparalleled staff in our research division that I really want to acknowledge. I'm going to turn it over to Pete, who's going to talk about why CNT built the tool and how it works.
All right, thanks, Miriam. So I'm just going to start at first principles here. So what is affordability and how is it defined in our country right now? Well, pretty much the conventional standard right now is that your housing costs, the household housing costs, should be about 30% of its income. And that rule of thumb has really sort of driven the development patterns across the U.S. Lack of knowledge of how much it costs to actually get around at those places has been deficient, we think, as of in that standard, and really has forced us to make decisions with an incomplete set of information about a certain location that we're gonna choose to live in, or we're going to choose to develop if we're developers or investors. So sum that up. The rule of thumb fuels the search for the lowest cost land to build housing on, regardless of the location. So as a result, home seekers, as they say, drive till you qualify for a mortgage or even a lease to look for some rental areas. And that may not serve all their purposes. That's at the household level of decision making, but more importantly, residential lending and construction industry has produced an enormous amount of housing stock in location inefficient neighborhoods because land's cheap and it's easy to develop. And it seems like they're building affordable homes when they're doing that for the market. So in other words, the 30% rule of thumb, and it's more than a rule of thumb since it drives lending and rental decisions, is incomplete because it does not consider all of the information related to a specific location. So we promote and advocate for looking at a broader definition of what affordability means. That includes the cost of transportation. So you might say, well, why transportation? Why not pet care or something else? But because, well, transportation, as planners, you all know that it's very connected, first of all, to place. Ask anybody what they think. Do people at the edge of urban areas spend more or less on transportation than the people who live in the urban center? And people will say, duh. Of course, the urban dwellers spend a lot less. So we want to make that that we can take advantage of that and put numbers to that. We know that it's the second largest household expenditure after housing, and the costs are largely unknown. Ask the same person how much do you spend on transportation, and they're likely to maybe tell you how gas prices are or what a new car might cost, but to really put it down in a monthly kind of budget way would challenge anybody. So people make, and that's just where you live now. But to think about when you're moving or where you're going to develop some housing, how would you know what people are spending in that area? And that's really what we're driving this index towards. So we're driving people to invest in a location that well, the current definition of affordability is driving people to invest in locations where they may be spending a lot more on transportation and therefore exposing themselves to the volatile costs of transportation. And so a lack of affordable information fuels sprawl and inefficient development patterns. So how we do this is we use a calculated transportation cost and compile them with measured or combine them with measured housing costs at a neighborhood level to provide a more complete picture of what real affordability of a location would be. So let's just think a little bit about the factors that drive transportation costs. Well, we know from the Consumer Expenditure Survey that American households, on average, across the whole country, spend about 18% of their expenditures on transportation. So that's not really 18% of their saving or their income, depending on how much they're saving or if they're going into debt and so on. But we know of all the outlays, it's about 18% of what they spend. But what we do also know is that when you look inside metropolitan areas within the country, places like Baltimore spend as low as 13%, Chicago something around 15%, but then on the other end of the spectrum, places like Detroit spending more than 18%, spending 19, 20%. So it varies, right? Transportation costs vary on where you live, and again, go back to that duh statement. But looking at the transportation costs at a metropolitan level just isn't good enough and doesn't really focus the decision making in the way that we think it should. So what we're looking at is to look at the neighborhood level, and what we're suggesting is a benchmark that would say for any given neighborhood, we would say that neighborhood is affordable for a household if they're spending something like 45%. Well, not something like, that's where we're setting the standard, 45% of their income on housing and transportation. And once you do that, once you redefine what that is, you're no longer using that 30% for housing and 15% for transportation, but you could think of, you can imagine a scenario where someone could find a house that would in traditional sense be not affordable, where it might be 38% of their income, but then if their transportation costs are only 7%, if it's a very dense urban place, think Manhattan or Chicago or San Francisco, places like that where housing costs can be high, but transportation costs can mitigate that. That still makes for an affordable neighborhood. So ideally, we'd have lots of places in this country to choose from to achieve this balance. And one thing our research has showed that in the U.S. that there are quite a few places, but we really believe there could be more. And I think good planners like you all can help us get there. So what does some of this analysis show? Well, so what makes it for a location efficient neighborhood? So as I said, we look across the metropolitan areas and we see this variation. But we know that in Baltimore, there's got to be places that people are spending more than just 13% on their transportation costs. And in Detroit, there's places where it's lower, where they're living in, people are living in much more efficient places. So what we've sort of zoned in on is to look at areas where you really see good access to services, walkable destinations, good access to transit and jobs, and all of this is sort of enabled by high and moderate density of housing. You notice I didn't put land use mix in here. Probably should look at land use mix when you're thinking about what makes it for an efficient neighborhood. But I'll talk about that a little bit later about what are some of our research is showing on that. So what we know is that places that have these attributes we call have high location efficiency, or are location efficient places. And I just want to talk about that term. We've been throwing it around quite a bit. So what we mean by that is it's much like energy efficient building. Still keeps you warm, but without trying and being just as warm as everybody else, you're saving money on gas and electricity because your house is energy efficient. So likewise, a location efficient neighborhood allows you to do all the things you want: get your kids to school, go to soccer practice, get to the grocery store, and all the things you do in a day to work. But saves you transportation dollars because you don't have to depend on high cost amenities to do that, like autos. And so in other words, it saves you transportation dollars without having to compromise. So as a result, households in places that have good attributes in this list, what we find, own less than an auto per household, will drive a lot less and use more public transportation. But also, and it's not included in here because it doesn't really come on an explicit cost, but people will walk more and drive more. And in general, some research out of the University of British Columbia, among others, have shown that it really adds to health benefits as well. So in order to drill down to a neighborhood level and look at these variables, we've developed a model, which I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here. So the idea here is that it's H+T, right? So you get housing costs. Those data are fairly widespread, and what we do is we go to the census and we say, we collect the data on selected monthly ownership costs for owners and gross rent for renters, and that's what we call as our housing part of it. But since we don't have transportation measures down at this level, we have developed a model. So the idea is you come out with your transportation costs. That's what we're trying to get to, and what we have developed is a model that predicts three types of behavior out of a household: how many cars their households own, how far they'll drive those cars, and then how much they'll use public transit. And then, of course, we have to apply a cost factor for that. And I might just say that so this little arrow here represents, just a multiplication of a cost factor. And just to say what we're using, it's about $5,000 in $2,000 to own a car, whether you drive it or not. About 9 cents, again, in $2,000 to drive that every mile. And then and some transit costs. That what we do there is we allocate the total transit fares that are collected by all the agencies to the households that are served by those agencies that use transit. So we in the words of a statistician, you might say, normalize the amount of dollars spent by every household such that the total equals the amount collected by the transit agency. So that's about as complicated as I'll try to get today. These guys all know that I can get a little bit carried away talking in language that maybe not everybody wants to hear. Anyway, but the main part of our model is really how these 9 variables on the left of this slide connect to those 3 behaviors: auto ownership, usage, and transit usage. And what we've done is broke it down into 2 different classifications of variables. Ones that are basically place-based, and I'll just list what they are, and you can see how well this sort of correlates with the previous slide of the type of neighborhoods we have. So residential or gross density is a measure of households. The residential is households per residential acre, where we estimate that. Gross density is just a household per total acre, whether there's a park or an industrial area in the area. It just gets counted the same. The average block size is a measure of we use that sort of a surrogate for walkability. We know that people will walk when they're smaller blocks. we have what we call our transit connectivity index, and it's kind of a complicated GIS-based index that we developed that really relates how easy is it to get to a bus, not where that bus goes or a train, but where it goes. And I just would suggest that if you want to know a little bit more detail, where I went on a little bit more about all of this. Last year in Chicago, we have Tuesdays at the APA, and last July I gave a seminar like that, and you can go to the APA planning.org and pick up that website, and you can see more than you probably want to know about these. But so suffice it to say, the transit connectivity and the job density is really a sort of complicated indices that say how much jobs in transit are around. And we used average time journey to work because we thought it would be important, but it turns out it's actually not that important. We know that only 20% of trips in a day are getting to work. Most of everything is doing everything else. Most of people's transportation costs goes to going to the grocery store and piano lessons and things like that. So that's the location. But then we know that household variables, right? You know, wealthy households own more cars than lower income households, and bigger households have more, and the more workers per household outside of the house, the people who work outside of the household, we see that that's related to these behaviors as well. So we fit for all 9 of these variables, come up with a set of complicated regression analysis equations that we can then predict that given these variables. But then the real crux of the matter, in order to make an index out of this, is we hold these household variables constant. And we do that so that you can really focus on the inherent location efficiency of every neighborhood. So in other words, we're controlling for local demographics so that our index is a measure of affordability inherent to the neighborhood because of its development patterns and not who happens to live in that neighborhood at any given time. Now, I said I'd mentioned land use, and you notice that there is no land use in here. Well, we have done some research, and first of all, land use is really hard to get. There's not a ubiquitous supply, GIS layer of all land use in the states. So where we have focused in Washington, D.C. And in the Bay Area, what we see is that, yeah, it does correlate highly with these behaviors. But by the time we do the fit for these 6 other neighborhood variables, land use does improve the fit, but the fact that it's so hard to get, we do not put it in the model. But it's incremental in its improvement. So we think we're capturing most of what land use, the benefits of land use with these 6 variables. Okay, so how does this look in the real world? Well, I just show you an example, and Stephanie will show you how to access these on our website and really get into it. But let me just sort of give you a quick brush of what you might see. So this is the St. Louis, Missouri, and Illinois area. St. Louis is right about there. Yellow on this map means that the housing stock within that is less than 30% of the typical household in the St. Louis metro area, which I've just said what the typical household is. Makes about 44K, 2.5 people a house, and a little bit more than a worker per household. So a lot of the area is affordable. In fact, I think 80% of the housing stock in the St. Louis metro area is represented in the yellow block groups in that map. Now, alternatively, when we implement our index, the picture changes somewhat. So it's the same household, but now we've estimated what that household would spend on transportation, and then folded it into the equation and require that it's less than 45%. You see that the area of affordability really shrinks, and is focused around the urban core, but also in some small towns and some areas that are efficient, not necessarily within the city. Just for completeness, about the yellow area here represents a little less than half, around 46% of all the housing stock in the St. Louis metro area. But I want to bring up one more map to talk about what is affordable housing for the most stretched households. And what this map shows is a recalculation of affordable, or what transportation costs are for a moderate household, someone making about 80% of the regional median income, somewhere around 35.5K a year. Same size and workers per household. You see that now the area of affordability has really shrunk and limited. But so there's opportunity in that limited area where there is dense urban form, good transportation infrastructure, and so affordable housing should probably be focused in that area. So couple things. I mean, one of the things is look at any metro area in the whole United States, and you basically see a very similar story that gets told. And Stephanie will show you guys how to do that. If you haven't already played around with the website HDAindex.org. So I'm gonna change a little bit here and just say that everything you've been looking at here is based upon 2000 census. So it's kind of out of date, not even kind of out of date. It's fairly out of date. But so we're now in the process of updating our data and our website. And so this summer, we've been working on it for a little while. But here's a little preview of what we're gonna release at the end of the summer. So first of all, we're going to extend the coverage. Up till now, we did the 337 metropolitan areas as defined by the 2000 census, and now we're going to be looking at 940 what are called metropolitan and micropolitan areas. I'm sure you're familiar with those terms, or if you're not, ask a question. So that'll we were covering about 80% of the population, and now we're going to be upwards of 90%. We're using the ACS 5-year estimate, which is a rolling estimate, which has the advantages that if this works well and is well, we believe it will, we could recalibrate and be more current and keep a rolling average of that. This is the first rollout of using these data, so it's a bit of a challenge, as anybody who's used any of the ACS data probably knows. We're developing a better national transit database. I talked about that transit conductivity index. Well, when we built the site that is up and available now, we really didn't have transit data for all metropolitan areas. We had them for a lot, and most of them, but we didn't have them for all. And so now we're developing a national transit database so we really can look apples-to-apples comparisons of metro regions to metro regions. The other detail, and this is a bit of, now I'm getting a little bit down in the weeds here, but remember I talked about the $5,000 per car, and that's just one average we use everywhere. And people have sort of suggested that may be inadequate in some ways, that people of various income cohorts may spend more or less on cars ownership. So we're developing a better and more detailed version of that. We've been talking to the U.S. Department of Transportation, and they're interested in pursuing this as well. So we're sort of looking to see. We haven't got a solution to this, but we will have a better, more detailed ownership model when, maybe not when we roll it out initially, but as it goes forward. Another thing that people have mentioned is that our measure of walkability, and I mentioned back when I was talking about the parameters that we use, is block size. And people have said, well, you know what, we really use intersection density. We think that's better. Other people use, block density is better. And so we're looking at different measures and seeing what's going, what's going to work the best, and that's really what drives this. So we're really excited. We're gonna enhance the website even more than Stephanie will show today. But we're really excited to see what we see and ways that people will use this new and creative data. And I just want to say a little bit of a preliminary result is that basically it looks the same. Things have changed, but the trends are all the same. So now that you have a little background on the H+T Index, I'll turn it back to Maria, who will present some of the ways planners, policymakers, and others have used this index.
Thanks, Pete. What Pete didn't say is that we didn't originally have the data for 337 metro areas. We started small, and the index has grown over time, really from just a handful of metro regions to the current coverage. And as he said, we're poised to grow again to capture micropolitan areas across the country. The fact of the matter is that the growth in the coverage of the index has led to more usage. And what I'd like to do today is talk to you about some of the places and uses to which the index has been put. Today's audience of planners representing NPOs, regional councils, local, county, state, and federal governments and consultants really represents the sweet spot of index users that C&T is trying to reach with the H+T Index. But having said that, I want to point out that another key audience for the index is the general public. I imagine that all of you reach a point in your jobs where you're trying to convince people, whether they're appointed or elected officials, business people, residents, or advocates in the housing and transportation arenas, of the wisdom of your proposals, for more sustainable forms of development. My experience has been that the index is a very powerful tool for getting people to understand the notion of sustainability and what it involves. At a very basic level, people know that for their lives to be sustainable, they've got to be affordable. And because the index talks about housing and transportation costs at a household level, they very quickly understand and grasp the impact on their pocketbook. And kind of having reached that understanding for themselves, when they see regional maps or municipal maps of housing and transportation affordability, it's a pretty small jump for them to understand the implications for their own communities and regions. So I think a point I definitely want to leave you with today is that the index resonates with people and makes it easier to reach consensus on future development. I'm going to cover a range of H+T applications today that include regional applications, the siting of affordable housing, transit planning, and scenario evaluation, just to name a few. I urge you, as you hear the presentation, if you have questions, please pass them through. But don't focus just on the content of the presentation. I want you to pay attention as well to the various devices that CNT uses to get our messages across, because they are very effective from our experience. So the first application is going to be a regional planning application. One of the regions in the country that's done a lot with H+T is the San Francisco Bay Area. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission, their MPO, hired CNT to develop a custom analysis of housing and transportation affordability for their region and to recommend policy reforms that would lead to improved affordability as a way of advancing the state of practice there. So we opened our analysis with the standard shot that Pete showed you before. This is a little bit different view than you would get from the website because we were doing a custom analysis for the MPO. And so it's showing more gradations of affordability. But still, the point is that in the yellow and green areas, you can have housing affordability looking at the map on the left. And when you transition from just housing costs to housing and transportation costs on the right, you see that the area of affordability shrinks considerably within the region. These two views hold constant for median income and are directly comparable to each other. This view changes the underlying assumption a little bit in that it calculates affordability for households earning 80% or less of area median income. And you can see from this view that there's really very few places in the Bay Area with average housing and transportation costs that are affordable to families at that income level. Maps are great for showing how affordability plays out geographically, but they give no sense of the order of magnitude of the numbers behind them. And as a result, one device that CNT uses a lot is to pair maps with bar charts to give people a second way to gauge the loss of affordability. This chart shows that while the loss of affordability is striking for households that earn area median income, when you shift from housing at 30% of income to housing and transportation costs at 45% of income, the loss in affordability is dramatic across all three scales for low, moderate, and low-income people, and it's particularly acute for those earning 80% or less or more, 50% or less of income. Another device that CNT often resorts to is showing strictly transportation costs for a region. In this case, we've mapped them out against the Bay Area's transit system. And the point of this presentation is that transit in and of itself is not sufficient to lower transportation costs. You can see that the transit system winds its way out to very remote parts of the region, but in many of those places, transportation costs fall into the pale blue level, which is $12,000 or more $12,000 or more a year, up to $14,000. So what's really needed is the density, the smaller block size, the mix of uses, and the job accessibility that Pete referred to in order to achieve affordability. In the interest of time, I'm showing you only a few of the maps and analyses that we prepared for MTC, but I want to close this little chapter by saying that 3 tangible things resulted from this work. The first is that the Metropolitan Transportation Commission set a goal of reducing the housing and transportation burden for low and moderate income residents by 10% as part of their 2035 regional transportation plan. They've also adopted the H+T Index along with other sister agencies like the Association of Bay Area Governments as a performance measure under the Sustainable Community Strategy that's required by SB 375 in California. And finally, most recently this year, the MTO has allocated $10 million in seed capital for a transit-oriented development land acquisition fund that they expect to grow to $40 million with private matches so that the region can add to the supply of affordable housing along their transit corridors, thereby ensuring that people at all income levels will have access to affordable transportation. The second application demonstrates how the index can be used to optimize the siting of affordable housing so that it does come with affordable transportation. CNT undertook this analysis after Illinois became the first state to adopt the index in making housing, transportation, and economic development decisions. We studied 8 years' worth of data related to housing development financed by the Illinois Housing Development Authority from 2001 to 2008 to determine whether policies put in place in 2005 had had a measurable impact on the combined cost of housing and transportation affordability. Since we're talking about developments that have been financed by the State Housing Finance Agency, by definition the housing is affordable. So what we've done here is map the IDA finance developments against transportation costs. And if you look at the map, the transportation costs are lowest in the city of Chicago, and they rise in concentric arcs around the city as you move from Chicago to less dense suburban and exurban areas. The upper right-hand chart is important because it tells us that IDA's policies that have had an effect on preserving lower transportation costs for the residents of their developments. You see that the average transportation cost is a full percentage point lower for the neighborhoods where IDA developments are located than they are for the regional average. And then the lower chart shows similar information broken out by geographies that are readily accepted and understood in the Chicago area, and those are Chicago, its inner ring suburbs, and the exurban areas, just to demonstrate how these transportation costs vary across the region for IDA developments. We also cut the data by whether the IDA developments had access to transit. And this chart's particularly powerful because it shows that residents can save as much as $3,000 a year by living in a development that has access to both bus and train service rather than one that has neither type of service. That $3,000 represents a pretty significant savings at 80% of median income, which is $41,000 a year in the Chicago region. Because of these cost savings, we then took a look at whether transit access had improved for IHDA developments between the two halves of the period that we were studying, and we found that it had improved. In the earlier period, only 60% of IHDA developments had walkable access to public transportation, and by the second half of the period, that had risen to 74%. Unfortunately, we also took a deep dive using CNT's Transit Connectivity Index to see what the quality of that transit service was, and we found that the quality of the service has actually declined between the two periods. Pete spoke earlier about how important job proximity and access are to keeping transportation costs low, so we mapped IHDA's family developments against job centers, and were struck by the fact that the two fastest growing employment corridors in the region had very few affordable housing developments located nearby. A final device that we use when we're talking about housing and transportation affordability is case studies, and so I'm presenting here case studies of 3 different IHDA developments that allow you to examine the underlying measures that contribute to higher transportation costs. And as you can see, moving from left to right, the 3 developments move from an urban setting, an inner ring suburb, and an exurban location. You can see that block size more than quadruples in size in the progression from urban to exurban. Car ownership and VMT double, and transit ridership for work commutes drops by 75%. Once again, I want to say that for our money, it's not the analysis that's important, it's what you get out of the analysis that's important. And as a result of this particular study, the Illinois Housing Development Authority began requiring developers to use the Census Bureau's On the Map website and the local employment dynamic data that's available there as a better measure of job availability in order to score points on their applications for housing financing. IHDA also decided to approve their qualified allocation plan, which is the policy document that guides the scoring of the most competitive proposals for 1 year rather than 2 to give their staff time to study CNT's other H+T recommendations so that they can be incorporated in a subsequent revision faster rather than wait 2 years. Our third example takes us to Cincinnati, where H+T was used in conjunction with a number of other tools to highlight the community benefits that would accrue as a result of the proposed streetcar line. The H+T analysis showed that the streetcar alignment had strong potential for creating enclaves that could have lower combined housing and transportation costs. Using data from the On the Map website, CNT mapped the region's major employment centers and showed that the streetcar would connect the many jobs in Cincinnati's downtown with the concentration of jobs in uptown. We used our Transit Connectivity Index to show that most of the region's employment centers are well served by transit, but that a few are really just beyond the reach, and that as a region they need to be thinking about how to bring those employment areas into the transit fold. Our scan of the market opportunities for transit-oriented development along the streetcar route showed that locations with the greatest short-term potential, that's the map on the left, were located on the outskirts of downtown, and that the longer-term opportunities on the right were located in the over-the-Rhine neighborhood, a low-income minority community situated between downtown and uptown. This analysis helped Cincinnati secure a $25 million urban circulator grant for the streetcar from the Federal Transit Administration and $51 million in ODOT funding to build the streetcar. When the new administration of Governor Kasich took over, They withdrew all of the state support for the streetcar, and the analysis convinced the Cincinnati City Council to proceed with a scaled-back version of the streetcar using only local funds, as opposed to scrapping the project entirely. D.C. is one of the cities, along with the Bay Area, where several interrelated H+T projects are coalescing into an H+T-defined way of doing things. Beltway Burden was a collaborative publication between the Urban Land Institute, the Center for Housing Policy, and C&T that presented the combined cost of housing and transportation in the metro area using 2006 data sets. The report made quite a splash when it hit DC media outlets. As part of our ULI-CHT engagement, C&T created a custom cost calculator for DC, Boston, and the Bay Area that allows users to personalize information about their household so as to get a better fix on their housing and transportation costs. Once again, as a result of this work, the region's Council of Governments recently set an H+T affordability goal of 45% for 59 regional activity centers as part of their Region Forward 2050 plan. In addition, C&T is currently developing a scenario evaluation tool for the district that will enable their planning department to gauge the impact of different development scenarios on transportation behavior. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, we've developed a training webinar for local housing counselors to teach them how to incorporate transportation costs into their counseling sessions. We've also developed a packet of materials that can be given to first-time homebuyers to make sure they think about average transportation costs before buying. The pilot was launched this spring and is currently being tested and evaluated by the Housing Trust counselors. C&T hopes to take it to scale following feedback from their staff. Since we don't have a custom calculator for every region in the country, we've urged the Santa Fe counselors to introduce their clients to the Abogo website. Abogo is a consumer-oriented derivative tool of the index that allows users to compare average transportation costs by the addresses of the places they're considering buying or renting. Being the innovators that we are, C&T's research staff added a gas slider to the Abogo website this spring as gas prices were rising, so that visitors to the site can now also check how gas price increases will impact their costs. And just so you don't think that the H+T Index is all about big cities, I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight our work in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where we help local stakeholders apply the H+T Index data to 8 largely rural counties. We provided custom data to Grand Valley State University and their partner, the Grand Rapids Area Coalition to End Homelessness, which they used to write a report on housing and transportation affordability in their 8-county region. The Grand Rapids customization examined transportation costs for households of different sizes earning 50% of area median income. If you go to our website, the lowest level of income you can get to there is 80%, and we provide only the typical household size for the region. Well, actually, that's not true. You can also take a look at local income levels on the website. No? Oh, sorry. This was C&T's first ever rural analysis of housing and transportation costs. It showed that in rural areas of the region, households can spend roughly $200 a month more on transportation costs than similar income households in urbanized areas. As I'm sure you're all aware, the Federal Sustainable Communities Partnership of HUD, DOT, and EPA has latched onto the concept of housing and transportation affordability and incorporated it as a criterion in the Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant Program, the Community Challenge Grant Program, and the Tiger Planning Grant Program. In addition, each agency has established H+T affordability goals as part of their strategic plans. We're not happy to rest on our laurels at CNT. So in addition to all of the updates that Pete referred to, we have several more applications on the horizon. If you as planners want to stay current on H+T developments, please sign up for our H+T newsletter, whose URL is at the bottom of the slide. You'll receive a monthly update about new developments, website features, descriptions of new projects, new end user resources, and information about new applications. We're very interested in knowing what you do with the H+T Index. So if you've already done something and want to send us a note on that via the chat box, we'd be very happy to hear about it. But more importantly, 1, 2, 3, 4 months down the line, after you've had time to let this all sink in, if you want to get back to us with information about what you've done as a result of this presentation, we'd be very happy to hear it. I'm now going to turn it over to Stephanie Morse, who is going to do a demonstration of the H+T website.
Thank you, Maria. So now that Peter and Maria have talked about the H+T Index, its development, and its applications, we will take a look at the H+T website. We've actually decided to do this as a series screenshot with all of the bandwidth and servers and computers involved with a webinar. We figured this would be a more smooth way to go through this. So on that note, what you are looking at here is the H+T splash page. You'll arrive at this at htaindex.org. And as Maria showed, this is the map of the 337 metro areas that are currently covered. It is also actually a tool to help you select a region. So what happens is if you hover over the map and click on it, you'll zoom in, and then you'll be able to select a region from here. If you don't know the region or what it looks like on a map like this, you can actually hover over the region, and each name will pop up to help you select that way. Another option to select a region is if you scroll a little further down on the splash page, you'll see a form box where you can enter in the metropolitan region name. You can either use a drop-down to see the list of all the regions covered, or you can just start typing and an autofill feature will help you select the region that way. So let's go back up to the map and we'll select this way. So I'm going to zoom in Chicago because we live here and we're familiar with it. You can see again, if you hover over the region, the name will pop up and then you'll just click on the region. And the first thing you'll get to is that the website defaults to the side-by-side maps of our H+T Index. As Peter explained, one of the main focuses of the research is to expose the hidden costs of transportation, add them to housing costs, and redefine the affordability. So on the left, you'll see the map of the traditional definition of affordability, where the yellow areas indicate average housing costs affordable to the regional median income household. And on the right, you'll see the map where we've added transportation costs to the cost of housing. And in this case, the yellow areas represent places where H+T costs combined represent less than 45% of the area median income. So while we keep talking about the area median income and fixing household characteristics, I want to point out that up in the top of the map area, under where the region is identified, you can see the definition of the typical household in the region. So here in the Chicago area, the regional median income is about $52,000. There's an average of 2.6 people per household and an average of 1.3 commuters per household. So those are the three household characteristics that will fit and run the model on. So all of the resulting data that you'll see on the website is solely a function of the built environment, not these household characteristics, since we're holding those constant. So now we'll get into the maps a little bit. I'm sure the navigation tools up here in the upper left look familiar to most of you. They're pretty standard for most mapping programs. So you can use the plus and minus arrows to zoom in or to pan around the map. So if we just start to zoom in here, you can see how that works. And you'll get to a point where you're zoomed in far enough where you can actually see the block group boundaries shown in green here. Those are what we constantly refer to as neighborhoods. And actually in the middle, you can see the value for whatever variable you're looking at for that block group. If you're in a dense neighborhood with small block sizes or small block group sizes, you might find these boundaries a little distracting. And if that's the case, you can use this option at the top of the map to turn the block group boundaries off. And you'll see if we click on that, you'll see the same map just with the boundaries gone. Now, if you're looking at a map without the boundaries, you can still see the block group values for whatever variable you're looking at by clicking on the map. Wherever you click, you'll get 4 values, like I did right there. So the 30.8, the top value, that's the average value for the block group I clicked within. The next value where it says LaGrange Park, that's the municipality or the place that I clicked within. The third value is the county, and then the fourth value is the regional average value. So again, you'll get that for any map you're looking at for whatever variable you're looking at. So I want to get into some of the other features of the map, but first we will change the region just to get out of Chicago a little bit. So you'll see that up here where the region's identified, you can click on the box that says region, and it'll bring up, again, the entry box where you can type in the name of a region or the map where you can select a region. We will zoom into Reno, Nevada for this. And again, you see the default is this side-by-side of the H+T Index, or the new view of affordability. But we also have a few other preset comparison maps that you can look at. So up here on the top, you can see that there's 4 tabs. So right now we're looking at the H+T Index. But we can also click to look at gas cost impacts. And what you see in these maps are the annual household gasoline expenses. And the difference between the two maps is that we've changed the gas price. So on the left-hand map, we've used the 2000 gas price, whereas on the right-hand map, we're using the peak price from 2008. I'd like to note that we keep all other variables constant here, so we're assuming the same driving behavior between the 2 years and everything like that, and all we're changing is the gas price. But what that shows you is that areas that are more dependent on automobiles and have to drive more are much more susceptible to the fluctuations in gas prices. Their gas prices increase significantly more than the inner city areas where people can get by with driving less or have more options. The next tab you see here is the greenhouse gas impacts. And this shows you the carbon dioxide emissions from household auto use in 2 different ways. So the map on the left shows the emissions per acre, and the map on the right shows the emissions per household. Traditionally, the map on the left is what you might see, and this kind of lends to the argument that cities pollute more, and that's bad. But we show this because we want to advocate for looking at emissions on a per household basis. And when you see that, when you look at this view of it, you see that households in the center city in dense urban location efficient areas actually emit much less per household than the surrounding areas where people are forced to drive more. And the last tab on the top, is a little bit different. This one brings up custom comparisons. So what you'll see here is a list of all of the variables that have anything to do with H+T. So we have the affordability indices, transportation costs, various measures of gas prices, then we have the greenhouse gas impacts, and I just scroll down right there, all of the independent variables, including the environmental variables and the household variables, as well as housing cost variables. So what this does is you can see the little buttons over here on the side. You can choose any 2 variables and set up your own side-by-side comparison. So here on the left map, we'll look at autos per household, and I'm about to click on the residential density here to show that comparison. So as you see, those are the 2 maps that just popped up. I chose this comparison because this really kind of gets to the heart of the H+T Index, where you see high residential density, we very clearly see low auto ownership. And the inverse of that, where we have low residential density, you see high auto ownership. And that really is one of the driving forces behind the H+T Index. And as we've been mentioning all along, all of the variables and measures involved in the H+T Index are calculated at the census block group level. So again, you can zoom in and see the variation at that level. And if you wanted to get into changing the variables and setting up different comparisons, you can either go back up here to the custom comparisons, or where your variable heading is, you can click on this little change box. Either way, you will get the full list of variables again, and you can set up any sort of comparisons you're interested in looking at. I'd like to get out of this now and show you some of the other features of the site. Up here in the upper right of the map, where we see display and change, this little change button opens up a whole lot of cool features. You can see right now what we're displaying is the legend and description. So that just refers to this band right here, where you can see the basic legend of the map and the description of the variable. If we click to change that, you'll get a whole list of different ways that you can display that. I'm sorry this is a little blurry. We are having some problems with the screenshots at this point, but I'll walk you through. So the second one is the summary table of statistics. If you click on that, what you'll see is minimum values, average values, and maximum values for whatever variable you're looking at. You'll see them both for the region as a whole, but also for the viewable area of the map below. So if you're zoomed into an area smaller than the region, this second column will just show you the statistics for what you're looking at. The next one you can look at is a graphical legend. This shows you the count of block groups or neighborhoods in each of the colors displayed on the map below. The next legend is a histogram. I'll note here that these get a little wonkier as you go down them, so I'm just going to kind of move through them quickly so any data geeks out there like us can go back and look at them on your own time. But this shows a histogram of the distribution of data between the different bins that you see here. And the last legend view is a line graph. So what this shows you is on the x-axis, you see the variable that you're looking at. So over here on the left, you see autos per household. And the y-axis shows you the three indices. So you see housing cost as a % of income, transportation cost as a % of income, and H+T as a % of income. And what you can see there is how each variable corresponds with the index that you're looking at. So in this case, as autos per household goes up, housing cost as a % of income tends to go up. So you can set up some interesting comparisons there to see how the different input variables correspond with the different outputs. Now the last three display options are a little bit different in that these are actually aggregation tools. So you see population statistics, household statistics, and neighborhood statistics. Now for these, what you do is you'll select whatever you want to aggregate. So in this case, I'm going to select population as an example. And then you'll get an option for focus. So if you click on this, you'll see that you can focus in on the map area, again, what we're looking at right here, the whole region, so that would be the metropolitan area, a county, a municipality, or if you happen to be in New England, you can see the New England towns and cities. So in this case, we'll choose a municipality, and then once you do that, you'll get a list of all of the municipalities in that region that you're looking at. So in this case, let's choose Reno. And now what you see, first of all, what you see is that the boundary of Reno has shown up on the map now. That's that kind of teal color on the map. And what this does for you is it aggregates the population statistics for the city of Reno in each one of these bins, as shown on the map. So what you can see here is about 8,300 people living in block groups where the average auto ownership is less than 1.4 autos per household in the city of Reno. So again, you can do that for the map area, the whole region, the county, or any county, any municipality, and any New England town or city. And you can do that for the population, the count of households, or the neighborhood. And in this case, the neighborhood is defined as a census block group. So just to wrap up, I'd like to show some of the other supporting materials that we've included on the website. You can see up here in the upper right all the little tabs that you're probably familiar with most websites. But there's a link to an FAQ. This is primarily focused on navigating the site and the various features of the site, so a lot of what we just walked through. There is also a glossary, which defines just about every phrase that you'll encounter on the website, if there's anything you're not familiar with. There's also an About section. This has most, if not all, of our H+T reports, the work that we've done with H+T, community profiles, Metro report, and is just a little bit of history and background on H+T. There is a link to the methods section. So this has just a basic overview of the methods. You'll see at the bottom the graphics that Peter showed, as well as a link here in the middle to a much more detailed methods paper if you're interested in more detail there. And just to wrap up, there is a link to the mailing list. Maria explained this, but this is where you can do that. So in the upper right, if you just click on mailing list, it'll bring you to this entry form where you can give us your information and subscribe to our H+T mailing list. So that was a very quick run through of all the features, or some of the features of our site. So don't hesitate to submit your questions if you have any, and we'll try to go back and cover things more slowly if need be. But with that, I will turn it over to Stephanie, I think, the other Stephanie, who will facilitate the question and answer.
Yeah. Thanks so much, all of Stephanie and Pete and Maria for getting us through an awful lot of information there. It's 1:05 now, so we're starting our Q&A a couple minutes later than we had hoped, but they did a really good job of keeping us pretty much on schedule. The questions that we've assembled here, they're going to be a little bit out of the order in which they were submitted, just to keep them, sort of grouped together in a way. So the first question we have is to please explain the distribution of H+T applications. For example, I think the person's referencing the map that we showed, one of the earlier slides where it showed the map of different applications. And so I think you have to go into the other slides, actually, where the applications of the H+T Index appear to be concentrated in the Midwest, with none in the Southeast.
And I would say that the answer to that is that CNC has been very opportunistic in terms of where it has gone to try to apply the index. We're interested in doing index applications in those regions that are interested in applying them. And I would say that what this map shows are locations that have expressed a strong interest in the H+T Affordability Index. I would love nothing more than to go to the Southeast United States when we get next year's Groundhog Day blizzard in Chicago. And so I encourage you, if you're in the Southeast, particularly Florida, along the coastline, give me a call. I would say a second determinant of where applications where CNC is engaged is that we've been very interested in trying to get a range of applications. So yes, we could do regional applications all over the country, but it wouldn't accomplish much in terms of reaching a broader audience and trying to show different ways to use the index. So I would say we've been opportunistic when it comes to geographic distribution and very deliberate about making sure that we have transportation applications, housing applications, regional planning applications, even consumer-oriented applications, because we want to reach out and touch as many different audiences as possible.
Okay, great. Thanks, Maria. We have the next question. I think I know who's going to answer this, but I'll go ahead and just put it out to the panel again. So someone said, glad to hear you're establishing a broader national transit database. How are you separating New Jersey from New York City metropolitan area, since New Jersey has a statewide transit system / provider and data that differs from New York City?
Well, maybe I'll start and Stephanie can chime in, but moving the phone a little bit. So yeah, this is a very good point, and this is part of the reason why we're doing a more detailed and deeper dive into transit accessibility. So let me just talk a little bit about sort of our plan, and what we're working on right now is we're actually looking at how transit agencies provide their data to websites like Google and others that do transit planning. You probably have heard of, depending on your level of transit data familiarity, something called GTFS, which is a standard way of transit agencies to supply their both route or stop locations, but plus route frequency and service. So we're plugging into that infrastructure, and we're developing and getting these data from as many transit agencies as we can and compiling them. So the New Jersey, New York metropolitan area really poses an interesting problem. One of the things, maybe I'll just switch back to the previous map, is look at that northeast corridor where all those metropolitan regions are surrounding each other. And in fact, New York City metropolitan area, in the way that the definition that we've used, is actually fairly limited to the 5 boroughs and Westchester County, New York. You notice that Long Island is its own, and then Newark and Jersey City and places on to the west are all separate metropolitan areas. So yeah, it's important that we can attribute the amount of spending on transit to the correct geographical area. So that's something that we're going to get more correct in this next upcoming iteration. And I would just like to add to what you said here. Yeah, while New Jersey has the statewide system, there are some metropolitan or city or smaller transit agencies that supply sort of niche markets, I think, within the state. I think that's right. I could go on, but suffice it to say that yeah, this did need a lot more detailed work, and this is a good example of why we need to do that. So I hope I answered your question.
Stephanie, did you have anything to add to that? No. Okay. Great. Well, our next question then is how have state and local taxes, particularly property taxes, been considered in the index?
Okay, so as Peter described, we use the selected monthly owner costs from the census to capture ownership costs for housing. And I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm relatively confident that the selected monthly ownership cost data that you get from the census includes property taxes. So we have included it to the extent that it's included in that census variable.
I might just chime in a little bit. Gross rent is a little bit of a conundrum. What renters, how those taxes trickle down to renters is a little bit of is a little more complicated. But we think that I mean, if you believe in sort of rational markets and supply and demand, that the gross rent should encompass those costs as well.
Okay. Thank you, guys. The next question is, what methodology was used to determine employment centers in the Chicago example?
Okay, well, I can take that since I did a lot of work on developing that. So we use, as Maria said, the longitudinal employment data from the Census and the Department of Labor. And before that, actually for our model, although you guys used that for the Cincinnati work, but to develop our model in our employment access, we also use something called the CTPP, which I'm sure you're familiar with as the Census Transportation Planning Package, which relates census information to employment, similarly that the LED data does. So in those data, you get the number of jobs, the actual where employment happens, not just where workers live, but also where they work, by census tracts in the CTPP case and actually at the block group level for LED. And then what we do is we have basically a GIS algorithm that I'll just walk through quickly. We could talk more offline if you want. It is to look at, so we look at a region, we pull out the census tract with the highest employment in it. We call that the center of the first cluster. And then we look at clusters that intersect or tracts that intersect that cluster that are above a certain threshold. So many workers per acre within those areas. And then we just keep doing that until we run out of more tracts that are above that threshold. And then we constitute as a employment center. And then we do it again. We find the next highest employment census tract with employment that's not in a cluster yet, and keep iterating on that until we found all of the places. And then we only call it let me just finish that sentence. We find all the places that have clusters of census tracts with employment above a given threshold. Our threshold's fairly low. We use 7 workers per acre, although I think we fussed with that. I'm not sure what we used for the Cincinnati work, but I think that's what we did, yeah. And so then in the end, we look at those clusters and we demand that there's a certain threshold of total numbers of workers within there to call it a regional employment center. And I think that was 5,000 or 10,000 depending on the region and what works. So I hope that that maybe is a little long-winded.
Okay, let's keep moving here. We got several questions yet to get through, and it's 1:14. Actually, here's a very easy one, Pete. I assume, well, a couple of you could answer this one. What is the data source for average block size?
Oh, we use the census definition of a block, which is not based on demographics. It's actually based on this, the Tiger line file, which is based on streets and boundaries and water. So it's just simply connected set of Tiger lines that form a block. So it's a physical definition.
Okay. And this next question is, oh, I thought this was an interesting one. How do mortgage lenders respond to this index? Has this approach been accepted anywhere? And I assume the questioner is asking, has this approach of H+T affordability, which probably also brings in the concept of location-efficient mortgages. So the question is, how do mortgage lenders respond to the use of H+T affordability?
A little less than a decade ago, C&T convinced Fannie and Ginnie Mae to approve a loan product that was called a location-efficient mortgage that would allow a higher income-to-debt ratio by virtue of purchasing a home in a location-efficient place that would allow the buyer to get by with fewer cars and lower transportation costs. Unfortunately, that pilot program, and it was a pilot that was implemented in only a few places across the country, was not very well used because we were in that period of the frantic run-up in home purchasing that led to the collapse in 2006 and 2007. And lenders and brokers were so free and easy about the debt-to-income ratio that people didn't even need the LEM as a product to qualify for a mortgage. They were qualifying for mortgages well beyond their means, and as a result, the product was never really used. C&T has places high priority on trying to resurrect the LEM in this day and age of greater scrutiny and greater care related to residential lending. We've had several draft bills on the Hill refer to location-efficient mortgages and include recommendations for resurrecting them. We have yet to succeed on that front. But we will keep at it, and we'll keep you posted through our newsletter.
Okay. Thank you, Maria. There's a question here that has to do with the 45% affordability standard that CNT recommends. The question is, do you think that spending 30% of income on housing and 15% on transportation is still unaffordable, or do you think that's actually justified?
I'll start. Well, I mean, given the statistics and what I showed with the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey, it looks like it's within the realm of feasibility, and that we would get a good population of people, and it would allow for better decision making in terms of where you choose to own or rent a house. I would say that, you know, affordability indices in general are somewhat arbitrary in nature. Where did the 30% come from? Our founder likes to say it's related to some old English poem about a week's wage in a month's house or something for rent. Or I don't know. I'm not literate enough to quote that. But and so what we were trying to do here when we set this is somewhat be aspirational in scope. I talked about, you know, places like Baltimore and Chicago being in the 13 to 15% sort of spent on transportation, and if 30% is the given sort of standard, then it kind of makes sense that 45 should work. I like to say, you know, you shouldn't just shoot for the average where it's 18 because, you know, maybe we should say that all Americans should weigh the average weight, but we know that that's not right either. We're all a little too maybe have sat on our couch too long and need to get out and chase the bus more. But I digress. So it's aspirational in nature, but as you can see with the numbers and the way we've shown this, that this I think will set a standard that will allow for smarter and better choices. I don't know, Maria, Stephanie, you have anything more to say on that? Or?
Yeah, I would just say the places that Pete cited all happened to have fixed guideway transit systems, and I want to, you know, emphasize that achieving 45% affordability on housing and transportation costs is something that happens in smaller places and places without fixed guideway service. It is largely a function of the density, the block size, the mix of uses, and the access to jobs that really drives that equation. And so I don't want to leave you with the impression that you have to have fixed guideway transit to achieve that level of affordability.
Okay, thanks. We're just getting our slides to show the last slide there with contact information. We were alerted that would be a good idea to show that now. So moving along here, we have the next question is for, I believe, well, I won't say who's going to answer this, but what factors were analyzed in the TOD opportunities map?
For the short-term measures, we took a look at market statistics. We looked at number of jobs. We also looked at retail figures for the area to get a sense of what was happening, and we looked at daytime and evening populations. The long-term scan removed the market characteristics and substituted in the H+T Index characteristics to demonstrate places where the block size, the street grid pattern, the opportunity existed without major configuration for achieving low combined housing and transportation costs. So I would say that in a nutshell, I could give you a longer description, but I think for the moment that'll serve.
All right, thank you. So this is a quick and easy one. You mentioned that you were going to be expanding your coverage in the 2011 release. Do you have a list of areas you are planning to cover in this release?
We do. We don't have it up on a website.
We are, because we're using the 2005 to 2009 American Community Survey data, it's indicated within those data that we should be using the metropolitan areas from the OMB definition for 2008. So what that means is if you look at the OMB Bulletin 2008 core-based statistical areas, those will be the areas we're covering. If you want to contact one of us, we could send you that.
Maybe we should put it in the next newsletter or something.
Yeah.
It's kind of a long, I know it's 940 metropolitan areas,
yeah.
including, you know,
well, it's a link
the big one.
to it. A link to it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So similarly, when will the H+T Index be updated with the latest census tract?
Oh boy. So there's a lot of issues with census tracts, but when we do update the data with the ACS, the rolling average from 2005 to 2009, 5-year average, that is using what's called the 2009 geographies, are really based upon the 2000 geographies with some changes. And there have been errors in those definitions at the Census Bureau, which they know about and have marked on their site. So it's a challenge to get it all right. So if you're talking about the new census tracts, meaning the 2010, either the collection, while we are using the 2010 blocks to aggregate up to block group census tracts for data that we don't require demographics on. In other words, the socioeconomic measures, so the new census. What I'm trying to say is the new census is different than the old census because it's only counting people, and it breaks across race, gender, age, things like that. That are required by the Constitution to develop the House of Representatives districts. They are no longer doing with the decennial census what used to be called the long form, where they do the social economics, household income, autos per household, all the data that we need. So that's why we're having to rely on the American Community Survey, which will go on forever at this 5-year rolling average. So in some sense, it's a feature. But it's a more highly sampled database, which is going to be a struggle. And we're not sure when the transition will go from the 2000-based census geographies to the 2010-based census geography. There was a lot of information. Maybe you didn't want to know, but it sounds like it was a pretty focused question. So.
Okay, thank you, Pete. So here's another question. It appears that the gas cost index, I think the gas price factor, applies one single gas price over a whole region, and as such, it shows a lower impact in dense urban centers. However, gas price varies greatly over a region. For example, here in Chicagoland, where we are, so we know this as well, suburbanites pay $3.80 a gallon, while urban core dwellers pay $4.50 a gallon. Is there any way of having a more detailed analysis with specific gas costs per neighborhood?
I totally recognize what you said is correct. The problem is access to data. The gas price data that comes out of the National Energy Information Service out of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, from the Department of Energy, is really regional, with a few metropolitan areas included. So if you want to know what the gas price in pick a city in Des Moines, Iowa, you're really using the Midwest average. So it's even worse than you think from what your question was. But those are the data that we have accessible. That's why we put the slider on a BOGO, so that you could actually tune in your own gas prices and say what those look like. So from a household's perspective, you could say, well, if I'm going to fill up downtown, yeah, I'm going to pay $3 or $4 a gallon. But if I'm willing to drive and waste the gas, this is always a little calculus I never quite understand. I could drive to Indiana and even pay less, right? Because which I can't believe that anybody would actually do that. So it would vary. But so from an individual point of view, the gas slider, I think, is our attempt to get to that. From a regional planning kind of point of view, where you're trying to look at where it is advantageous and not to develop housing versus gas prices, I think this is a conundrum that belongs in the category of lack of good data. So as we get more detailed data, we'll see.
Similarly, we had two other questions that had to do with, well, does it account for this, and what about this? And I think that they're similar because they also deal with data availability. One person said household greenhouse gas impact data is great, but what about estimates for daytime population or businesses in the downtown, suburbs, et cetera? Any plans for this kind of data in the future? And the next question that's similar is the carbon footprint by household is interesting. Was freight factored into these calculations?
I think the answer to both of those is the same, in that the carbon dioxide emissions that we're looking at are solely the function of household auto use. So we're not taking into account businesses, we're not taking into account transit, it's just how much people drive. That's the only factor that we're taking into account for that.
Right, so it's not meant to be a complete carbon footprint. Right. But maybe just a little tweak on that. First question is, do we look at the total daytime population of a region? And what we found in other, and not in this work, but in a similar study that we've done about where buildings could have location efficiency, office buildings and such, we've seen that the combined workers and residential variable actually does drive some mode choice decisions. But that's more about people coming to a location to work. So that's an interesting question, and one that we keep coming back to when we do our research.
Okay. So we've got about 1 more minute left to get a question in here, and I think probably I'm going to choose between questions here. So if you could be succinct with this next question, then I want to cut off the next one after that.
Okay.
So the next question is, there are many variables, I think the person means, that involved in location selection, I think you were saying, and some may not be easily quantifiable. How does your model take them into account? For example, availability of quality education, university, crime, and impact of those factors on this whole equation of affordability?
I mean, the short answer is we don't. Those are intangible, as you said, and we're not advocating that anybody do anything. What we're saying is we're trying to give complete information so you make an intelligent choice. So if you're going to move to a remote suburb because the schools are better and crime is perceived to be less, that's your decision, but know that you're going to spend more on transportation and take that into consideration. And you're going to expose yourself to the volatility of the petroleum market, as I always want to put in there.
Okay. Great. And I'm afraid that we're going to have to close the rest of the questions at this point and move and hand it back over to Brittany to close things out for us. So thank you to everyone for submitting questions. We did our best to get to all of them. But if we did not get to your question, please send it your email, and we'd be happy to get back to you. You can do that either via this question comment tool here in the webinar, or you can use the survey instrument that Brittany will be posting to you later to submit your question that way, and also your email address. And of course, our email addresses are up there on the screen. So thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I also want to just say thanks to Peter, Stephanie, and Maria for a great presentation, and also thanks to Stephanie Schuller and Matt Bork for helping out with organizing this webcast and making it possible. So for those of you who are still in attendance, I just want to go through a few reminders about logging your CM credits and about our recording of this presentation. All right, so just a second here while I load up our slides. All right. So first off, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, June 24th, and then select today's webcast, Introduction to the H+T Affordability Index and Applications and Planning. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are also recording today's session, so you will be able to find a recording of this webcast along with a 6-slide per page PDF at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. So this concludes today's session, and I want to thank everyone again for attending.